consciously or unthinkingly, to imperialism. This is overwhelmingly true of contemporary sources, though there are some noble exceptions, like William Scawen Blunt's Secret History of the English Occupation of Egypt, 1907, but it is also largely true of secondary accounts written by modern historians, especially those angled towards a more popular audience. Take the case of the Egyptian Revolution of 1882, the pivotal event in this analysis. This was a liberal, nationalist, secular movement of modernization and reform. It was smashed by a British military invasion. The purpose of the invasion was to secure control over the Suez Canal and ensure a continuing flow of interest payments to European bankers at the expense of the native peasantry. Philip Magnus, writing in 1958, considered the British action entirely legitimate, for Colonel Arabi, the Egyptian nationalist leader, had set up what was virtually a nationalist military dictatorship in opposition to the European financiers. He thought it quite unreasonable that the Egyptian government should have mounted guns at Alexandria when a fleet of British warships arrived offshore, since these were evidently intended as a threat to the Royal Navy. It does not seem to have occurred to him that Egypt was entitled to defend its national territory, nor that the subsequent British bombardment of Alexandria was an act of aggression indefensible under any imaginable framework of international law. How would the British have reacted to a hostile fleet in the Solent? Michael Barthorpe, 1984, describing the situation inside Egypt, reports that everywhere fear and unrest grew, with the military of all ranks adopting an arrogant and overbearing attitude. What is one to make of such a statement? What does it mean? Who was fearful? Who was restless? Towards whom were the military being arrogant and overbearing, if indeed they were? Towards the European colonial presence in Egypt, perhaps? But the implication of anarchy under Arabi then allows Barthorpe to argue that the whole military operation was to restore Egypt to stability, solvency, and security under the Khedive and his own ministers by a complete overhaul of all Egyptian institutions, guided and assisted by British advisers, inspired with British standards of justice and humanity. Michael Asher, 2005, explains that revolutionary forces seized their chance to unleash a flood of anti-foreign sentiment, and that Arabi's supporters in Alexandria had slaughtered foreigners, looted the city, and threatened passage through the Suez Canal. Asher served in the Parachute Regiment and the SAS, and one cannot help feeling that his understanding of the 1882 revolution was colored by war on terror propaganda, much as Magnus's surely was by tabloid reactions to the Suez Crisis of 1956. At times, the failure of critical analysis is so complete that we seem to have moved no distance at all from the reactionary jingoism of the late Victorian yellow press. Even the better texts, both primary and secondary, usually adopt some sort of liberal imperialist, orientalist framework. Without critical theory, nothing can be explained, and works of conservative and liberal history are, almost by definition, devoid of critical theory. They are the smug reports of an imperial, and indeed post-imperial, establishment. On the other hand, while recent academic research has often been far more critical of imperialism, much of it undertaken by African and Asian scholars exploring the colonial experience of their own countries, alternative narratives are sometimes informed by the bourgeois nationalism of local elites engaged in modern state-building projects. The tendency is to view the colonizer critically, but to idealize the colonized. Specifically, to idealize any and all forces of resistance, whatever the nature of the leadership. The tyranny, barbarism, and ignorance of native potentates have sometimes been airbrushed away in what are effectively nationalist narratives, not critical histories. Those who stand with the oppressed against the oppressor do themselves no favors by turning local tyrants into resistance heroes. We should not regard the Sudanese Mahdi or the Somali Mullah as erstwhile leaders of national liberation struggles akin to Ho Chi Minh, Che Guevara, or